All right, Piers, we're at a couple of minutes past. We might get started. I know today's a bit of a packed schedule, so take it away when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Piers Matthews. I'm the CTO of MOQdigital. And today we're going to be talking about Power Platform Essentials. So this is an extension on the previous webinar that we did. And really what we want to talk about today is the 4 essential areas that will set you up for success when you choose to take the Power Platform, deploy it, and how you go about managing it. Remembering that the Power Platform is a set of capabilities that allows you to build applications and workflows across your environment for both professional developers as well as citizen developers. So understanding what it can do for you and how to govern it are important. At a high level, of 4 topics we're going to talk about is, firstly, understanding what the platform has. So what does the Power Platform have in the box? What are all of those components there that you can use? We're then going to talk about designing your approach. So as you choose to go and roll out the Power Platform, you need to think about your environment strategy and how do you choose what types of environments to create for what use cases. We're then going to talk about setting up a center of excellence and why it's important to do that in order to control governance and nurturing. And lastly, we're going to talk about which licenses are best fit for your particular use cases. And spend quite a bit of time understanding how you go about choosing what it is that you need to procure if you don't have this already. So the first practice we're going to look at is understanding what the platform has to offer. So some of you might have seen this before, but I think it's really important to delve into everything that's in the platform. So when we think about building solutions, we pick the right components and we put them together in the right way. So I like to think of the Power Platform as providing really these 4 things: data, apps, automation, and smarts. Data really being this idea of the ability to, using a tool like Power BI, visualize data that we have in our business to make decisions, to understand what's happening in our operations, and to understand what's happening in the apps and the processes that we build. Power Apps is the user interface. So this is the interface that we use to create new data, to capture data, and to interact with end users. Power Automate is that automation piece. So this is the thing that allows us to essentially automate workflows in our business, whether these workflows that involve humans getting an approval from one human to another human, sending information from one human to another human, assigning a task between people. Power Automate does that, as well as system orchestration. As part of an app that we build, we might need to move data from one system to another system and have a process in between. Power Virtual Agents is what we call the smarts part. So this is the idea that we can have a bot to interact with our process, just as what we call a conversational user interface. So a bot that allows us to interact and kick off and capture data as part of the process. Underneath that, we have data connectors, which allow us to connect to a host of different platforms, AI Builder, which allows us to infuse artificial intelligence into our processes, as well as the Common Data Service, which is a model that allows us to store and manage data. So delving into a bit of detail around each of these capabilities now, the first thing we need to really understand when we look at the Power Platform is the Common Data Service. So what is the Common Data Service? The Common Data Service is essentially this idea that Microsoft has where all your business data that relates to Office 365 and Dynamics 365 sits in a single centralized store. What this allows us to do is have this data store that really spans the breadth of the entire 365 estate. And what it does for us is it gives us pre-built data models. So Microsoft and industry have put a whole set of data models together that represent different types of use cases that we may have. By having all the data inside of this common data model, it means whether I'm using Dynamics for sales or Dynamics for operations, doesn't matter if I'm coming from the sales channel or the operations, i.e. the finance channel, data and rules is the same between them. So if, for example, I go and update a phone number, the rules that apply to the phone number update are the same in all areas of my business, whether those are finance and operations, Dynamics for sales, or if I go build my own custom Power App interfaces to talk into that data model. So that's really what the Common Data Service is doing for us. The other thing that it does is it allows us to rapidly generate what we call model-driven Power Apps, which we'll chat about now. As I said, Power Apps is the end user interface. This is the thing that we use to create the screens that users interact and create data. There are a couple of different categories of Power Apps, and it is really quite important that you understand what they are. The first thing is model-driven applications. So model-driven applications are applications that are built directly from that common data model. These are componentized applications. In other words, we don't have to custom build each little text box, set the color, set the rules, etc. What we do is we literally say we would like a screen to capture a contact. We would like a screen to capture an account. And these get scaffolded automatically for us onto the user interface. It then allows us to quickly build those applications and have them out in an environment associated with the use case we're trying to do. Model-driven applications are typically associated with Dynamics 365 use cases. So that's sales, services, marketing, as well as financials, for example. So a great example of what you might have is you may have this idea that says you want to build a custom salesperson's interface where they can have a very simple model-driven app where they're on the road, they can quickly capture client data and orders on the road and push it into their CRM system and then process that. The other option could be a backend team could pick up that order that's been captured by the salesperson on the road and run through the relevant onboarding and processing tasks. So that's what a model-driven application is. The next type of application we have is what we call a canvas application. These applications provide full control of the entire end-user experience and access to all different data sources. So these take longer typically to build, but we get a huge amount of control and we get pixel level control of what we want the user experience to be. Whether it's a mobile application or a desktop, i.e. browser style application, we're able to do that. More importantly, these allow us to access multiple different data sources. So although they can access the common data model in the CDS, we can also access a host of external data sources, SharePoint lists, and other data in our environment and bring that data together in our Canvas applications. The last type of application we have from a Power App is a thing called the Power App Portal. Power App portals are the components that's available to us to allow us to interact with external users or public users. So I might have clients, suppliers, or partners who are in the public domain, aren't part of my environment, who would like to be able to interact with that. So typically this is for self-service type scenarios. So a self-service sales channel when someone might want to place an order online, or a servicing channel. They may wish to call a technician out, be able to log a ticket to have that technician come out. These things typically engage directly into a common data service where the rest of your processes and workflows can kick off and run. The next component we have is Power Automate. So as discussed, Power Automate is this workflow engine. It's human workflow as well as system orchestration. Microsoft provides us 300 plus, I think it's 350 something connectors today that allows us to connect to the whole of the Microsoft cloud. So everything in Office 365 and Dynamics 365 world, as well as Azure, as well as hundreds of other platforms, both on-premise and SaaS applications that are available to us. Power Automate is built on top of Logic Apps, which is Microsoft's enterprise-grade system integration orchestration engine. So really it's got a rich capability underneath the hood. It provides end users with a visual designer. So in the little example on the screen, we can see that it's a simple flow. When an item is created in a SharePoint list, get the person's manager, set the approver status, and start an approval process that will then go get that item approved. So really simple workflow, end user able to build using Power Automate through drag and drop type functionality. So this is our workflow engine. Power Virtual Agents, the purpose of Power Virtual Agents is they provide us with a conversational user interface. So instead of building an app, what we might like to do is build a bot. And that bot is being built specifically by domain users. We're not talking about IT pros who have to build this. We're talking about end users who have real domain experience in the subject and are able through this visual interface on the right over here to quickly scaffold up a bot application. That bot can then be deployed through no-code build. It can be deployed into either Teams, onto your web page, or as a Facebook chat application. These things integrate directly with Power Automate. So for example, if you want the bot to capture data from the end user and then kick off a process in a backend system or in Office 365 or Dynamics 365, the bot will then directly go call a Power Automate flow and interact and create that interaction or that process. The example on the screen is an expense claim. RPA. This is an important capability. So when we talk RPA in Microsoft land, we talk about essentially user interface driven workflows. So this ability to automatically drive typically legacy application screens, and to have the flow take application information from a user and push that information directly into an end user's environment. So that would be, for example, I might have a legacy invoicing application, and what I want to do is modernize that with an app. And what I can do is build a Power App and then use Microsoft's RPA capabilities to automatically capture the data into that invoicing application. It either works in attended, which is an in-person mode, or unattended, which is in a remote mode. So in-person means the app runs next to the user on the application and fills in data. Unattended means it's running on a remote server somewhere and is busy engaging. AR services. So AR services is the idea that Microsoft has all these cognitive services available to us in Azure to consume and use in our environment. And what this Microsoft has done is they've taken all those cognitive services, those utility services, and they've made them available to us as services directly in the Power Platform. So what that means is that machine learning and that AR that we have in Azure Cognitive Services is easily drag and drop available to us in the Power Platform. So there are a host of these capabilities. An example might be a forms recognizer, which I'll demonstrate now. This ability to have a form or an invoice or something, scan it, automatically pick the data off that and use that in an application or in a flow. There are others, for example, sentiment analysis, which allows you to know based on data that's been captured in an application or one of your flows, if somebody is happy or sad, i.e. positive or negative. Because if it's coming through a Power Apps portal and a customer goes and captures a comment, and we figure out that's a negative comment, we may then, using sentiment analysis, say it's negative, and then go ahead and trigger off another workflow so Salesforce can understand what that person's experience was like. So that's the ability to embed those AR services into the platform. So what I'm going to do for you now is give you a quick demo of that first use case. So that first use case was about making sure you have a good appreciation of everything in the Power Platform. And the reason we discuss everything is very often are going to customers who are using the Power Platform, and what we find is they're only using flows, or they're only using Power Apps, or they're using a bit of Power BI, and they aren't aware of the full capability. So it's really important when you start to adopt this platform, so when you design apps and you have your makers build apps, you have an understanding of the broad capability. So the demonstration we're going to show you today is a really simple Power App, and this Power App is a Power App used to capture expense claims. So imagine that I had a SharePoint list, which I do have over here, and this SharePoint list is typically used to reference expense claims that people in my business may have. So I have a title column, a category, an amount, the status, who the claim was by, what the cost center was, who that approver is, the expense date, and attachments that I may want to look at. So one of the things I may want to do is create a nice innovative way to capture data into this data source and have workflows triggered off to get those expenses approved. So that's what Quick Expense Claim is. So if I have a look over here, I can see all my expenses that are in that list, obviously filtered by me. I can then go ahead and look at one of those expenses, with this one, for example, and in this expense, I can see all the information as well as the receipt that was uploaded as part of that. If I went then and decided I was going to go create a new expense claim in the simple Power App, I noticed that I could obviously capture all the fields, but I also have this thing called the forms processor. So this is the ability to use that AR cognitive services and embed them inside of the Power Apps that we built. So again, using two different components together. So if I click on Analyze over here, it's going to ask me to upload an expense claim or a receipt. I'm going to pick this Uber receipt over there and upload it. What's happening now behind the scenes, it's taking that receipt from my machine, uploading it into the platform, passing it on to the Azure Cognitive Services for forms recognition. I've created a pre-trained model, which is very easy to do. Literally just give it a host of receipts and say, these are receipts. What it does is it goes and figures out the fields and I tag them. Now what it's done is run that AR model and it's gone and figured out, hang on, here's the fields you were looking for. So this top field is very small, but it says 100% match. That is getting the title for me. It's then gone and got other data over here. So for example, you'll see it's populated the amount. It's automatically read off. It's gone and populated the expense code and populated those values directly off the receipt. I can then go and choose category because obviously it doesn't know the category, and I can choose the cost center that I want to build this to. Let's go ahead and say that this is under the IT department. I can then go and save that. So the second I've done that, what's happened now behind the scenes is that item has been created inside of my SharePoint list. By the way to create one of those apps from a list, you'll see there's a Power Apps button on every SharePoint list. If I click down and create an app, it will automatically do the base scaffolding for me. Now that that item is being created in the list, I'm just going to refresh that list. What we expect to see at the bottom is that item having been created. And there we can see it right at the bottom, 4877. You'll notice it has no status, it hasn't got an approve and a claim yet. And the reason being is, as I've added that item to the list, the next component in the Power Platform is taken over, which is a workflow. So if I go ahead and I refresh this workflow history, this workflow runs every time a new item is added to that list. So if I open that workflow, we can have a look at how that works. So we'll see a new item has been created. It got the manager for Piers in this case. It updated the approver status field and it started an approval workflow. So what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and send an email to the manager, who happens to be this guy called Oaken in this place. There's approval. If I want to, I can click on that receipt information. I can go look at the claim. And I can see this is the claim that's been made. I could open the attachment if I want to. And if I'm happy, in line in the email, I can say approve. So with that's gone ahead and done now, kicked off that process. So what I should see over here, ultimately, this is now going to complete. You'll see that it's gone through, it's now completed. The approval has been completed. Little green tick show me that's happened. If it was yes, it was approved, let the creator, i.e. Piers, know that it's been approved and update the status of approved. So if I go back to that list and I refresh that list quickly, what we'd expect to see at the bottom over here is that particular item has been approved. As you can see over there, that item has now been approved. So that's one way you can use the Power Platform. What I might...
We've just had a question come through quickly on that demo.
Yep.
Can we take a photo of the receipts?
Yes, 100%. So obviously for demo purposes, I have to show through the web browser. But if you click that Analyze button, it allows you to open up the camera or the gallery on your phone, and then obviously load a receipt. So absolutely, those controls do work in that fashion. However, what I may want to do is not create an expense claim through a application. I might choose to use a bot. So this is, again, extending using other components in the Power Platform to build out the solution. Again, essential practice number one, think about all the components in the Power Platform that can help you. So over here, I've got my little bot. I'm going to say hi. Hopefully the bot comes back and says hello back to me. Here it is. I'm a virtual agent. How can I help you? What can I help you with? I'm going to say expenses. Notice I spelled expenses wrong. It figured out that. Still able to know what I'm trying to say. And now it's asking me a question. On the right over here, you'll notice I've actually got this in the editor view or the developer view or the builder view. It's showing me exactly that flow that I've created, and really easy for end users to build one of these. So it's now on this question. What do you need? I'm going to say I would like to make a claim. Please provide a short description. Lunch with Kayla. Go next. How much, including GST, is say $48. What date? Let's say 2 days ago. Which category? In this case, I'm going to say this was entertainment. Cost center, let's say marketing. Now it says to me, you've now created this expense. Do you want to save this? Now what's going to happen, interesting, as soon as I click save, you'll see down here, it's going to call a Power Automate, and this is going to go and add that item into the list and click off that approval workflow. So if I say yes, that item gets added into the list. If I went back to my list over here, we'll see that same experience has now been created. And at the bottom over here, we should see that last one, which I think was $48. There it is. Lunch with Kayla Entertainment has been kicked off. And that exact same workflow would then run to take that for approval. One of the other things you may want to do is now put some reporting on top of this. So if you imagine I was a manager, I would want the ability to see all the expenses that are running inside of my environment that are for my team. So what this allows me to do, for example, just with a Power BI dashboard, create the dashboard and embed it in my app, it allows me to see expenses by date and then expenses split by specific cost centers. So very quickly, now taking 3 components and combining them together to build out that end user experience. So if I, for example, clicked on that, what it would do, it would actually open up that Power BI dashboard that I've created, where I may have more visuals with more detail that I may choose to directly dig further into the solution there specifically. So what I showed you over there was a quick summary of Essential Practice 1, which is understand what the platform has to offer. Don't think about just the app or just the workflow or just the virtual agent or just the dashboard. These things all should work together to build out the type of solution that you want to do. So what we saw there was an app, AI Forms Processor, Power Automate for approval workflow, Power Virtual Agent as a chatbot, and a Power BI dashboard all coming together to create a pretty innovative solution. And literally, there's not a single line of code in everything I've just showed you. So pretty much end users should be able to, with some nurturing, start to build those types of applications. Essential practice number 2. So this one, what we're going to talk about is the solution and the environment approach. So what we're talking about over here is If you think about it, that type of application that I showed you and many others, the problem that we're going to have is this is easy for end users to create applications, which means we really have to think about creating a safe space for end users to create applications that's well governed and controlled. What it also means is that we might create tier 1 applications that are ubiquitous to the business that we need to protect. So when we think about setting up the Power Platform, the very first thing we want to do is come up with an environment and a solution strategy. And the way you do this is think about applications in 3 categories. You think about applications as a critical category. So a critical application is a tier 1 application that is typically owned, built, and run and managed by IT with a robust ALM, so Dev, UAT, production lifecycle. They're typically big and complex applications that are tier 1 applications used by the whole business. So that's an expense claim, for example, if it's used by the whole business, could be one of those applications that we consider tier 1. The critical applications, and we want a set of governance controls around how those guys work. We then have, let's call them important applications. So these are typically applications that are built by business, but blessed by IT. So what that means, business users can build these applications, but because they're not tier 1, they may be tier 2, they touch a couple of teams that are quite important to the business. We need to have some ALM potentially, but what we need to do is have a level of management around those applications. Typically not very complex applications, but certainly can be important to the business. And then the one that everyone today uses, that's this productivity application. The personal productivity application. This is when Piers decides that when he gets an email from these 3 users, he automatically wants to create a task on his planner board that says he must do something or follow up. Right? That's that personal productivity workflow that he might choose to create. And that's the application that typically needs to be created directly by that end user. If it doesn't work, it's not the end of the world. It's affecting that one user, and it's that personal productivity or even the team productivity inside a team application. Typically, these are very quick applications to put together. And those are the 3 categories that we have. So if we think about those categories, that means we need an environment strategy. Environment strategy we recommend, which aligns pretty much to the Microsoft practices around this, is in a strategy looks like this. So today, all of you have Office 365, the vast majority, whether you like it or not, you already have an environment because everyone will have what's called a default environment. Now, the challenge with the default environment is really meant to be where those personal productivity apps happen. So that's where users create their own applications, and those applications are run directly in that sort of production state for them. No risk to the business. What happens though, what we see a lot of customers do is start to put all their tier 1 applications and everything in there. And the challenge with that is governance control boundaries are essentially at the environment level. So you start having these end user applications kind of mixed with production tier 1 type applications. So we do want to separate those things. So the recommendation is what you should do is have your default environment with governance controls and policies associated with end users. And then you have an organizational dev environment, an organizational test environment, and an organizational production environment. In the shared dev environment, if it's tier 1 applications, pro developers can work in that. You can also invite certain users into that dev environment to participate. What you then typically do is promote those into test when you're ready, have a user sign them off, then move them in production. Obviously, these environments are locked down and have different policies. We don't want those things being affected by what users are doing in the default environment. What we see sometimes is in large organizations, they may choose to create these 3 environments for specific departments. And that really just depends on the organization size, but certainly we want to try to split our environment strategy like that. Underneath that, what sometimes happens as well, if there's a large project, you may choose to split off that project in its own dev project environment, its own test environment, and then when you go to production, deploy it into the shared production environment. So that's a typical environment strategy that one would want to apply when you look at setting up and deploying the Power Platform. So I'm going to show you what environments look like in the Power Platform and have a bit of a chat about some of the key tips and things you need to think about. So this over here is what the Power Platform Admin Center looks like if you haven't seen it before. And you'll notice that I have a couple of environments over here. When I create a new environment, the first thing it's going to do is ask me a couple of questions. And some of these are quite important. Obviously, you need to come up with a naming convention and strategy that makes sense as part of your approach. Then it's about picking the type. There are 3 types: sandbox, production, and trial. Production is obviously for production grade solutions. Sandbox is typically for test and dev. And the difference being is on the sandbox, you can reset the environment, you can blow things away, which you wouldn't typically want people to do by mistake or whatever on production. So that's one of the key differences. A trial environment is exactly what it sounds like. It's a trial environment for 30 days that allows you to test some of those capabilities. Region is very important. If you pick the wrong region, you're going to have problems. And the reason is because regions and data gateways are bound together. So you want your Power Apps and your data gateway. And data gateway, by the way, is the tool that allows us to connect to data on premise. You need them to live in the same region. So regions are super important. You would want to put a purpose. Now, this button over here is really important. This is create a database for this environment or not. So as I explained, we have this thing called Common Data Service. That's what that means. If you choose to have Common Data Service, it will create a database for that environment, and you get one and only one database per environment. So this is where all those applications, the Dynamics applications, your Canvas applications, Dynamics Finance Operations, where they will then all interact around that single data store or that common data model. You don't have to have one of those, but it's important to understand you have that option. Now that we understand the difference in environment, let's have a look at the difference between two types. So here I've got a general usage dev sandbox environment. This environment, we can tell immediately doesn't have a database because when I open it, it says add database. So there's no database, which means the only types of applications I can create over here are Power Apps and flows. I don't have any Dynamics resources associated with the environment. I don't have sales, services, or marketing, or any of those people assets. I also can control access in only two ways. I have environment admin role. An administrator has power over that environment, an environment maker. And makers are users who want to make applications in that environment for other users to use. You'll notice there's no users tab because the way users are given access to solutions and applications is when you create an application, you share it to users. And the recommendation is when you share an application to users, you should share it to an AD security group as best practice because that allows you to control that access in quite an efficient way. If we go back now and we have a look at one of the other environments, for example, if I looked at this FS demo environment, you'll notice that it's slightly different. So the FS demo environment, this is the type of environment where we'll be deploying mixed flows and Power Apps, but as well as Dynamics applications. And in this case, I've also deployed Dynamics portals. And we can see that it has a database version. It also has an additional tab called Settings. And the Settings tabs gives me specific settings around Dynamics styled products that are built on top of that common database service, which you wouldn't have in the other type or the non-database driven environment. Under analytics, and some useful options over here. So in the admin center, as part of governance, you want to make sure how your database service is being used. So this provides you the ability to understand which users are currently interacting with your database, how many API calls are running through the database, and so forth. So a good ability to get a quick overview of what's actually happening with that database in your environment. The active users tab is quite useful. It's taking a little bit of time to load now. It tells me I've got 5 active users who've been interacting with that database, who those users are, and how much interaction they've specifically been having with that database in that environment. We have the same for Power Automate and Power Apps. I'll have you a quick view of Power Apps. So really the central view that allows you to understand what's happening over there. So if I look into Power Apps, we'll see, for example, this is on my default environment over there, and I can have a look and see how many app launches have happened. There's been 115 in the last while, specific app launch count based on what specific renderer they were using, how many active apps, etc. So I have the ability to quite quickly drill down and understand what's happening. I can also see how many errors have happened or been popped up on this end user experience in my environment to understand if there's things I need to start drilling into. So really quite nice, this ability to individually per environment, segregate those environments in strategy, and then analyze how those environments are currently performing. If we click on resources, we'll notice that I have this idea called capacity. I'm just going to quickly point this one out. So when you have common data service, so when you have a license SKU that allows you to have common data service, those common data service has a space limitation, and that space limitation is based on essentially the number of licenses and the type of licenses you've acquired for end users. You get essentially an allocation per user license. And what's interesting is it pulls it at the tenant level, not at the environment level. So it adds all your user accounts everywhere together and says, this is how much database space you've got. Why I'm showing this is one of the key things about segregating and understanding environments is knowing where that data is currently being spent. Because you might find, for example, this one is using a whole bunch of data of my data space, which is preventing me from creating new and additional environments, and you might have to do cleanup or procure additional storage capacity.
So Piers, we've had a question about that. Is there a limit to the number of environments that we can create?
The limit to the number of environments is based on the licenses that you have, based on the amount of capacity that you have. So there's no real theoretical limit, but if you don't have enough capacity that I just showed you over there, it'll prevent you from actually provisioning a new environment. I think it's a gig of storage in order to provision each new environment. And this is why, maybe I'll quickly show this, because a lot of people come across this mistake. If you look up over here, Power Platform admin settings, the default setting in many custom environments to go to is this. This says who is allowed to create a production environment? Everyone. That means every end user. Who can create a trial environment? Everyone. Who can allocate capacity? Any environment admin. These top two are the problematic ones, because what I see in many environments is end users end up on this page and, oh, I'll go create myself a new environment. So it's really important to lock that down quite early on. And if you haven't been using Power Apps, it's the one thing I recommend you go back in your environment and check, just to make sure you've locked down who's actually able to create environments. Otherwise, you end up using your quota, and you can't, then you have to go move applications from this environment to that environment. So the strategy does become quite important. What I wanted to show now was this idea of data policies. So we spoke about different environments. The problem with Power Apps is Power Apps gives us these 350 plus connectors. The problem with the 350 plus connectors is not just in Microsoft world. It'll connect to hundreds of external SaaS products. That creates a data leak problem. Why? Because your end user could conceivably create a new application and connect it to Trello, and all of a sudden you've got data, organizational information appearing on this public service called Trello that hasn't been approved by your business. So it's quite important to be able to lock that down. And Microsoft gives us a way to do this. We can create a DLP policy, and the DLP policy, we give it a name. We want to choose connectors. So what you can do over here is, out of all the connectors I have, I can say these connectors over here, for example, I would like to block those connectors. I can choose any connectors to block or not. My recommendation is for your default environment, the end user play environment, you should lock that environment's connectors by policy down to only Microsoft connectors that you approve to talk to SharePoint, to Dynamics 365, to the Office platform. That way you can make sure that the data stays in that 365 environment, where hopefully you have some control in that environment, as opposed to leaking the data, or approved connectors as you start to go down that route. Once you do that, the next thing you can do about doing a connector, instead of a policy at least, you can choose where you want to add that policy, either all environments or specific environments. And I could, for example, create the policy and say, I want to apply that to my default environment. And then I could go down to review and create policy, and automatically all those connectors will be disabled and they would not be able to use Flow or Power Apps in order to talk to that data set. Okay. Time's going to be interesting. Okay. The next thing you may want to do in the Power Platform. So in summary, what we've learned over there, environments are important. Separate your environments, create policies that lock users down in their default environment, and categorize your applications. So tier 1 applications, proper lifecycle, dev, UAT, production, owned by IT. End user applications, put them in default, lock down with policy. Make sure you keep an eye on data storage. Make sure you monitor those applications through the tools that are provided. One of the things you need to do in order to be successful in the Power Platform, essential practice number 3, is to set up a center of excellence. So what is a center of excellence? A center of excellence is essentially this idea that we have a group of IT professionals, i.e. administration, as well as a community of practice, end users. The thing to realize about the Power Platform, although it's fantastic for us IT developers and IT pros, it's also incredibly useful for users in your environment to be able to build out their little workflows. The thing is, we need to put some controls around it, because the last thing we want is an Access 2.0, where everyone's running off and creating their own database, no one knows about it, it's not managed, it's not understood. So what a CIE is designed to do is 3 things. Firstly, governance, making sure we have management. So what do you do in governance? Things like make sure that you have a process to request the building of applications, actually have one. How do you validate applications that end users build? Make sure you have a way to validate that meet some minimum set of requirements that you may have. And very importantly, if end users build applications, they'll build lots of little test applications. You need to get those things archived. You need to have a process in place to clean them up if they're not being used or edited or worked on. Nurture. Very important. You don't just want users to go out and start clicking buttons and hoping they're going to get it right because they'll have a bad experience. So you need to encourage them. So the way you do this is you're going to set up an internal community or community of practice and have those makers interact with each other and learn lessons. So have best practices, have templates, and have a training program in place to allow those end makers to learn how to build these things simply. Last thing is monitoring and measurement. Obviously, make sure the platform's been used, make sure who are your top makers, who are your worst makers, who's struggling, and identify areas for improvement. Now, what Microsoft has provided us, you can do all of this yourself. You can set this all up. You can have governance processes and Word documents and stuff to drive all of this. What Microsoft has given us is a toolkit called the COE Toolkit to really give you a starting point for all of this. The interesting thing about the toolkit, I'm about to show you in the specific bits that I think are interesting, is the entire toolkit is actually built in the Power Platform itself. So it's Power Platform in the Power Platform, essentially. So we'll have a quick look at some of the key aspects of that, and I'll talk through governance, nurturing, and monitoring, and how that can come into be with this toolkit. So the first thing you'll notice is I have got this view. This is called the Power Platform Admin View. This is meant for administrators to have a quick snapshot view of all the apps and so forth that exist in the environment. This is what we call a model-driven application. If you haven't seen one before, you'll notice it looks quite different. It comes through what we call the Dynamics 365 frame. So it looks like a Dynamics 365 based application. And in this application, immediately I can see a dashboard, who all my active makers are, what are my active environments? How many applications and flows do I have in each of those environments? What are the flow makers and how much? So this is apps and this is flows. How much are the guys actually doing? And I can see a list of all those applications over there. If I click on apps, for example, on the left, I can have a look at all the applications that I have. So what I may want to do is go and have a look at that one called Quick Expense Claim, the one we just demonstrated to you, and have a look at what this governance platform provides me. So one of the things you want to do is to make sure there's a minimum set of data and information around your application so you can assess and manage the risk. So out of the box with the COE platform, Microsoft has given us this template that allows us to do that. And obviously you can extend this with your own capabilities. So over here, there's a process to validate the requirements, assess the risk, and highlight it in a catalog for people to start to use. So if I look at some of the details behind that, maker requirements, there has to be a business justification. What are the dependencies? What is the access management process? What is the classification that I have in this? And what is the business impact of this application? And do I have a mitigation plan if something should go wrong? Then I have a risk assessment process that an administrator does. What is the risk assessment? What category is it? Do we want to put in the app catalog? And is it featured? You can extend and change these questions as you so choose, but the point is there's a starting point to essentially every application that gets built, run it through this process before it gets released out into the wild, this governance process. And you'll notice with the quick capture at the top over here, you could obviously, as you go through the process, capture the information that's relevant at that point in time. So every application of Flow, we have the ability to have a process like this as part of governance to make sure it follows our recommended standards that we may choose. If I click on makers, you'll notice that I can have a look at all the makers in my environment, and I can quickly see the number of apps and the number of flows that they have. Why this is very useful is, let's assume, for example, Piers has resigned because he's got COVID or he's sick or something, because you can hear I'm like really coughing over here. If I click on Piers, I can very quickly understand all the applications that Piers currently owns and runs and manages, right? So it's very useful in an end-user environment where they're creating their own apps. You want to be able to do that so you can quickly reassign ownership of those end apps to wherever you may choose in the environment. It's a very nice way to quickly drill down and see everything that is linked and related to Piers in that environment. So I've just shown you a taste of that. That's the ability to very quickly understand what's happening in the environment in terms of the apps, who owns them, how they run, and so forth. The next thing you may want to do is understand how end users will be able to validate the applications. So we have this thing called the Developer Compliance Center. This is a Canvas application, and this allows developers to come in and have a look at their applications and see if they're compliant with a set of rules that we have defined. Red is obviously bad, so I've got a whole bunch of red ones, some yellow ones. I'm going to show you the green one that I have populated was that quick expense claim. So if I click on that quick expense claim, you'll see I've got an end user view of that same data set over here. This is your maker's view. He has the ability to see all the information about his app, whether or not that app is compliant. And if he supplied all this data, which is the rule set that I have, business justification, access management, etc., all this impact stuff, I can even go and attach an image, and I can see that there's Piers Matthews as a current user. I would submit that, and what that allows me to do is get that app into an approval workflow to say that I've run it through that validation process, I've made sure that application is correct, and it does what I expect it to do. One of the things that's interesting about this, you can actually from here, if you've got the rights, republish that. So publish the version of that application. You can run it. But this one I find very useful, the ability to email all users who are using that application who have permissions on that. So if I was going to release a new version, I could create this quick email from here, and it was an email with whatever new features I wanted to tell everyone about this new version that's been released, without me having to figure out who actually works on that application. So quite a nifty little feature in terms of that governance process. The next thing I want to talk about is this idea of archiving. So in terms of a COE, we've looked at some of the governance capabilities in the toolkits. The next thing you may want to do is be able to clean up. These old apps start to become a problem. So the COE toolkit provides us a workflow to do that. You could obviously have a manual business process to do that, but since this is an automated platform, why not use the tool to drive it? So in this particular workflow, what it does is it goes to every single environment that I have and says any application that has not been modified in the last 6 months, let's quickly check with the owner of that application if they want that application to be archived or not. So what this does is it actually sends an email, see some little placeholders, it sends an email to the person who owns that application and says, hey, this application has been modified in 6 months. Is it old? Are you happy that we archive it? That person then has the ability to say, yes, I want it archived. And what this will then do is mark that app for archive. And we have another workflow running in the COE toolkit that will then take that application, take it on the environment as a zip file, and store it in a location that I choose. So in a SharePoint repository or even a Git repository if I so choose. So that cleans up my environment. I'm not wasting space. I haven't got dead or defunct applications there. So very useful to be able to do that. And that's available to you, as I said, in the toolkit. The next thing we want to do is nurturing. So quick touch on governance and what you can do there. When you think about nurturing, this is the idea of you've got to have a community of practice for people who want to learn how to make and to build applications. So what better way to do that than to use teams? So you can create a team for Power Platform makers. If you don't have teams in your SKU, you could create a SharePoint site. The idea is have a place where this community can come together and share war stories, engage, and get tips and tricks. So I've created a simple team site over here. And inside of that team site, what I may do is decide to have a list of templates. So if you've got an organizational template, for example, that's got all the good colors and stuff pre-rolled, you could put it over there. So any templates that you wish, you could put over there. So here's some app templates that I've created. I then have a template catalog app. So instead of interacting with the files individually, I'll have the ability to actually go look at all the templates that my organization has uploaded. And what this allows me to then do as a new maker, I can download, oh, that looks like one I could actually work on, download that, work with that template and extend it for my specific use case. So this is available in a template catalog, featured, all and new. This gives me the ability to actually drive through that and understand how that works. The next thing we may want to do is educate. So it's really important that if you're going to be rolling the Power Platform out and you want your makers to be on board, is to give them the opportunity to learn. So what we have in the COE toolkit is this ability to actually set up an event, have people subscribe to that event, attend that event, be it virtual or in person, and learn how the platform fits together. So if you look over here, I could create a new event. I can look at existing events that I have, but more importantly is this little button that Microsoft has given us over here. So what Microsoft has done quite kindly is they've enabled end organizations like yourselves to run app in a day. So these are simple end user practical solutions specifically geared for end users in trial environments to be able to test and learn. So we've got 2 app in a day and flow in a day. We also have app in an hour and app in 2 hours and a whole bunch of other hands-on labs that are available to you to train your end users how to work with the platform. Obviously, I can look over here, any workshops that I've set up in this little toolkit app over here. I can see I've got one over there that Oaken's attending. I've got another one over here that Piers and Oaken are attending. What that looks like from an end user perspective is this. An end user has this app available to them on their mobile or embedded in Teams, and they can then go say, oh, that looks interesting. Maybe I would like to attend that class and register for that particular workshop, and then obviously attend that. It also has a list of resources that are commonly used for end users to learn and train themselves and understand how that platform works. So really important to be able to set up a training program. Microsoft gives us these tools in the COE toolkit to help us manage that, but also pre-rolled training courses that are easy to roll out. And MOQ, quite happy to help you roll that out and do some of the training with your staff should you require that capability. The last thing we may want to do is get our apps into our users. So if you go back to the team, we've got this thing called an app catalog. So once all our makers are busy creating all these apps, they're going to ask us, please, can you let the users find my apps and use the apps? So how do you get apps in front of users? There's a couple of different ways: links in SharePoint site, links over email, favorites in Chrome or Edge, whatever your browser is, or an app catalog. App catalog is a great way to do it. It's like a little app store. What this allows you to do is create a set of apps, mark them as featured, and have them appear over there, and then you can have all the apps appearing over here that users have access to. You'll notice there's a request access button over there, and then a launch button once I've been given access that allows me to then use that app. So very important to have this kind of tool as a way to get apps out there into the end market. Again, this is built in the Power Platform itself, as you can see. The last thing we want to show you about governance is this idea that says, I would like to be able to monitor what's happening in my environment. What we have then is this Power BI dashboard, which very cleverly behind the scenes is connecting to everything inside of the Power Platform, all the APIs, and pulling all that rich and raw data to me. So I then have the ability to look at the platform and manage the platform better. So it gives me monitor, govern, and nurture. So what I may do, for example, under monitor, I might want to see what's happening with some of my apps. I can click on that app tab over there. And what happens over here takes a look at the data, analyzes the data, and says to me, well, this is what you've got across all of your environments. I can obviously go filter those by environments. It shows me how many Canvas and model-driven apps that I've got, how many app makers I've got in the environment, how many Canvas. All of this information is available for me to drill down and to work through that data set. Why is this useful? Because this is pretty useful, because this allows you to do something. For example, I am going to be doing a big update on my online SharePoint. I want to know all the applications that will be affected. Well, that's pretty easy. This shows me all the connectors I've got available. If I click on that little tick box over there, immediately what it's going to do is go filter the support and show me all the apps that currently talk to SharePoint. So I can take a risk assessment and understand, I can see which apps are now using that connector. Therefore, these are the people I need to notify when I'm doing that update. Just as a simple way to be able to drill into that data set, which would be quite hard to do without a CAE toolkit like this. And this Power BI dashboard is fantastic for that type of use case. If you look at app risk assessment, this is another nice little view that I like to show people. So what the app risk assessment dashboard is designed to do is help us understand the risk that we have with each of our applications. There's a scoring model associated with it, and what that scoring model does, it'll pop up over here. It actually applies a score based on the connectors, the usage, etc., and tells me if I'm at risk with this app and so forth. A good thing that you could do over here, for example, is I might be a little bit concerned about the applications that are shared with everyone. I want to make sure that there aren't any important applications that mistakenly have been shared with everyone. So this shared with everyone button, I notice at the top, I've got 2 apps that start with the word admin, and they look quite important. So quite clearly, somebody has incorrectly shared this with everyone in my organization who then have access to execute that application. So again, being able to do a risk assessment and drill down into the data and manage that platform. So as you grow, as you end up with hopefully tens and hundreds of applications, to be able to manage what's happening in that environment for you. Right, the next thing we need to quickly talk about is on this view is app licensing assessment. So one of the great things in this toolkit over here is we can have a look at how our app licenses are specifically being used. Because obviously you can have multiple licenses, which I'll cover just now, but because you can have multiple licenses, it's important to know which apps are using which licenses in which environments. You can understand how you distribute that workload. And as you grow, that starts to become important. So if I quickly go over here and, for example, select an environment, and let's say I say my default environment, and then what I want to do is I want to know all applications that are using the premium features, premium connectors, and so forth. So I can quickly drill down, understand which those applications are, have a look at how many users those applications are shared with, and make sure that I've got enough license coverage quite quickly in my environment. So it's very useful when you start to combine licenses, and you'll see just now why you will start to combine licenses. You can obviously manage that quite quickly through the monitoring dashboard over there. The last thing we can do is app gurus. So obviously I'm showing you apps. Everything I've just shown you can do for flows as well and others. I can see who my best app makers are. So Piers in this particular demo environment has created the most, followed by some of his colleagues. If I went over there and I clicked just on that box over there, I can obviously filter that down and see that's Piers. So really the ability to understand who are the best makers in my environment. I could, for example, say, show me all the people who are using that connector. And I'm not using that connector anywhere, so it'll come up blank. But the ability to figure out which users, for example, or makers know which connectors becomes quite useful. So that's governance, nurturing, and monitoring capability. Monitoring is super important, and having a dashboard available to us like that makes that really easy to do in terms of the environment. So a quick summary of that before we get to the last section. A Center of Excellence needs governance capabilities, so a way to ensure compliance and archiving processes and those types of things are happening. The toolkit provides us. Nurturing capabilities, a place to put community templates, a place to showcase applications, and the ability to set up learning applications, really important to driving environments. And then monitoring, the ability to monitor as you roll out this platform so you don't end up with Access 2.0. You need to be able to use those dashboards to understand what's happening in the environment. The next set of things we want to talk about is how do you actually go about getting the Power Platform. So this is the licensing piece. So the licensing piece is quite interesting. There's really three ways to get this. You get this through Office 365. So Office 365 licensing, the ones you get with Office, those licenses are specifically designed around productivity scenarios for Office 365 and Teams. Typically, all that data is stored in SharePoint. It does give you connectivity to many SaaS products and external applications, but not all of them. It gives you access to all of Office, but what it doesn't give you is access to CDS, no on-premise data gateway, and no premium connectors. All these apps are typically built as Canvas apps. An example of one of these would be a leave app form storing data in a SharePoint list, routing it to approval to a manager, and when that person's leave day comes up, put a message in Teams to say Bob is on leave today. That is a great example of where you might use one of these applications. It's important to talk about connectors because that explains the difference between the free licenses you get with Office 365 and the rest. We have two types of connectors. Standard connectors connect to all of Office 365, many of the SaaS platforms. Premium connectors allow us to connect to data sources outside of that world. So Azure SQL, normal SQL, PostgreSQL, any external data source, as well as to the Common Data Service, as well as features like push notifications. That's a premium feature, as well as some premium connectors like Salesforce. So if I want to talk to Salesforce, I need to have premium connectors. If we look at the next type of licensing we could have, this is licensing that is driven through Dynamics 365. So these are licensed by default. If you go to Microsoft or to us and we sell you the Dynamics 365 capability, you have Power Apps. It's sold with Dynamics 365 for sales, service, field services, marketing, and operations. All of those products come with the Power Platform. And in fact, this is the way that we extend or customize that platform using the Power App. So typically it's designed around scenarios that deal with Dynamics, that store all the data in their Common Data Service. But they do have premium connector capability, which means you can certainly extend those scenarios. You can create model-driven apps directly off the Common Data Store, or those Canvas applications as more customized end-user experiences. An example might be mobile salesman application, service agent application, or maybe you've got an internal ITSM process that you're running through Dynamics field services that you might want to be able to log tickets, as an example. So that's Dynamics-based licensing. The last type of licensing we have is what we call standalone licenses. So standalone licenses, they have premium connectors, they have CDS capability. You buy standalone licenses in two ways. You either buy them per app or per flow, which means you are going to be building an enterprise solution, one app that everyone in your business uses. So instead of licensing every single person you use it, what you do is you license the app and everyone in your business can then use that app. As many users as you want. The other way to do is say, we're actually going to be creating many applications. So then you go per user licenses. So per user licenses are where you license each individual user that then have unlimited access to all the features of the platform to both create and to use those applications. So those are the two scenarios. If you're rolling out one tier one enterprise app, you go for per app and per flow type licensing. If you're going per user licensing, full access to everything that I've spoken about today in the platform. There's some additional add-ons you can get for the platform. So these are add-ons, Power Apps portals, that's the external customer-facing view, it's an add-on. That RPA capability, the ability to drive user interface, it's an add-on. Power Virtual Agent, the chatbots, it's an add-on. CDS capacity, more database space, it's an add-on. And those AI capabilities, an add-on. The reason these are add-ons, none of these are really per user, they're generally at the tenant level. So you buy those capabilities and turn those features on in your environment. So you can imagine that it's quite possible, based on your environment strategy, you may have different license types associated with different environments, which is why spending time to work out your cheapest and best option is certainly worthwhile spending. But I always say to many customers, you don't have to license all users at once. Sometimes if you're going to just start with one app, you can go for the per app and the per flow type licensing to test out the platform, and obviously at a later date migrate onto the per user licensing as it starts to prove value in your environment. In summary, what did we learn? Very quickly, we learned what the platform has in the box, right? All the capabilities, and the fact that don't look at one, look at them as combined solution, essential practice one. We learned that we really need to have a good environment strategy before we go deep into this platform. Otherwise, you can end up with a mess, and all your tier one applications as well as your end user apps end up in the same environment, and it's very hard to manage. You want to set up a center of excellence. We've shown you some toolkits that help you manage governance, nurturing, and monitoring. You need to do that. And we need to make sure that we spend time understanding which licenses are better fit for our scenarios as we go through. That's it. I've put some links over here. I don't know how we're doing for questions, Kayla. I think we've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah, we've got a few questions that have come through. Let me. So this one came through when you were talking about Essential Practice 1 and doing that demo.
Yep.
Is there a function that can interact with Excel and a legacy app?
Yes. So Power Apps actually has a connector, and Flow has a connector to talk directly to Excel. In fact, it's one of the valid data sources. I've seen many people do this. They take an Excel document, they put it inside of a SharePoint list, and they have the Power App interact with Excel. Very common use case. And what was the other thing? Legacy application.
Yeah.
Legacy application, yes. So what I showed you there with RPA is a way that you can essentially drive a legacy application screen if you buy that additional add-on. And it's very powerful, actually. Microsoft just recently bought WinAutomate, which is a product that essentially is designed specifically for old school legacy Win applications, and it's been available to us in the licensing now as well.
Awesome. Can we customize the COE starter toolkit?
100%. Everything I showed you, every single one of those things is Power App. It's available on GitHub. That's actually, we download it with some very detailed instructions about how to install it, and it's fully customizable. You also don't have to use all the assets that I showed you. And in fact, there's more assets. I could probably spend 3 hours taking you through all the things that they've got in the CE toolkit. I picked out the bits that I found the most useful, but you can absolutely customize and extend that CE toolkit. Yep.
The next question that's come through is, can we license a mix of per user and per app?
Yeah, so as I said, you can have per user and per app licensing mixed inside of your environment. It's really important to take time to understand what you're trying to achieve, so you go down the route of getting the licenses correct up front. If you don't have any of this today and you don't have 365, my suggestion is start with going down a per app basis. Yeah, build your first application as an organization, maybe in your IT department, get comfortable, and then decide if it's good for you. Hopefully it is. You can see how powerful it is, and then look at scaling out licenses per your user. Remembering, if you have 365 today, there's a lot you can do already without buying anything new, because you have Power Apps and you have Power Automate already in the box.
And we've just got one last question, just because we've got a minute to go. Since that monitoring dashboard was on Power BI, can I assume we can get the same raw data off Power Apps, e.g. if we wanted to run workflows? That's
a great question. So absolutely. Everything I've shown you about that COE toolkit should point you to the fact that the whole Power Platform is exposed, believe it or not, through a set of connectors that are available to you in the Power Platform. There's APIs available, those connectors available. In fact, the way the Power BI dashboard works, it actually connects directly to those connectors and those APIs. So you can go and use those APIs and build your own workflows. So example, you could say, when an application is run over 30 times, kick off some workflow that does something. Sends an email, congratulations, your application has been run 30 times. As an example, you could build those types of use cases natively off the platform, because it's exposed and open to us to do that with.
Amazing. All right, well, that's it. And that's all we've pretty much got time for. We're just at the top of the hour. The slides from today's presentation, as well as the recording, will be made available to you after. We'll email them out this afternoon. But thanks, everyone, and thanks for coming.
So just before we drop off, any next steps, more than happy to help you guys with App in a Day workshops, App Design in a Day workshops. We have an ebook available to you. If you want to reach out, you want some help, no commitment, just to understand how you could adopt this platform. It's what we're here to do. Happy to help you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.